The rain had been falling for so long that Silas Mere had begun to think of it not as weather, but as a second road laid over the first. A silver, shifting road that ran down his collar, under his cuffs, into the seams of his boots, and across the patient leather of the pack on his shoulder, where 7 small bells slept wrapped in wool and oilcloth, each one tuned to a different warning, each one meant for a tower he had never seen and a people who had every reason not to want the sound of human metal above their roofs. He had crossed 3 borders in 8 days, and not one of them had looked like a border when he reached it. There had been no wall, no painted stone, no solemn guard asking names with a hand on a sword. There had only been ground changing its mind by degrees. Human wheat fields had thinned into sheep-cropped gray. Gray had softened into heather. Heather had risen into black pine and wet rock. And the low Selk road, which maps in taverns called dependable, had become 2 muddy ruts with grass growing between them as if the earth were trying, politely and with enormous patience, to heal from the idea of being traveled. Silas walked because walking was what he had left. The shop in Vale End had gone quiet after the fever year, its furnace cold, its shelves empty of orders and argument, its door bearing a notice in a clerk's careful hand about debts inherited by the living, whether or not the living had asked to continue. His father had made bridge bells, gate bells, herd bells, morning bells, all with the pride of a man who believed sound could be shaped into safety. Silas had learned the craft and then learned how little safety cared for being summoned. After the fever took his father, his younger brother, and the woman who had promised to marry him in spring if spring had the decency to arrive, he sold the furnace bricks one by one, packed what tools would travel, and became a man people hired when a hinge shrieked, a kettle leaked, a child cried for a toy with a voice, or a village needed a bell mended badly enough not to ask why his hands shook before sleep. The Orc clan of Thornwater had sent no invitation with warmth in it. The note had come through 3 traders and a suspicious nun, written in thick common letters on scraped hide. Signal bells failing, bring tools, take coin, leave by east melt. No name, no seal, only a thumb mark in soot and the dried shape of a mountain flower pressed into the fold. Silas knew enough to understand that a flower could be a warning, a password, or both. He also knew that coin from the north was heavier than coin from the lowlands, and that winter was coming with its mouth open. By dusk on the 9th day, the road gave up entirely. It did not end. It simply sank beneath brown water and long reeds, and the bridge that should have crossed the Thornwash stood half a mile away from where the map insisted it belonged. 3 black ribs of timber jutting from the current, shuddering whenever the river pushed whole branches against them. Somewhere beyond the rain and the wash of floodwater, a bell was trying to speak. Silas stopped. The sound came again, thin and cracked, not the full-throated toll of a tower, but a little weather bell, struck by wind or some desperate hand. Tin, copper, tin, silence. Then a clatter like teeth in a cup. He turned toward it with his pack dragging at one shoulder and found, beneath a leaning alder whose roots had been washed bare, a small orc girl standing on a stone in the rain, reaching up with both hands toward a bell hung from a bent iron hook. She could not have been more than 9 or 10, though orc children were difficult for him to guess. Her skin was the deep green of moss under water, her black hair cut unevenly at her jaw, her small tusks just visible when she bit her lip in concentration. She wore a cloak made from some shaggy hide too large for her, and on one foot a boot patched at least 4 times. The other foot was wrapped in a splinted brace of willow and leather, careful work and recently mended. In her fist was a nail. In her mouth was another nail. On the ground lay a hammer nearly as long as her forearm. The bell gave another miserable clack. Silas should have announced himself from farther away, He knew this the instant her head snapped toward him, the nail dropping from her mouth into the mud, her shoulders lifting like a cornered animal's. "I am not taking it," he said, and lifted both empty hands, which was ridiculous because the pack on his shoulder contained enough tools to take apart a chapel, but panic rarely admired precision. The girl stared at him. Rain ran off the end of her nose. Her eyes were amber brown and furious with the effort not to be afraid. "You are standing in the wrong water," she said. He looked down. The puddle around his boots was dark, nearly black, with a skin of bubbles gathering around the leather. "Is that bad?" "Only if you like your feet." He stepped back at once, slipped, caught himself on the alder, and felt the whole tree tremble under his hand as if amused. The girl sniffed. "Humans always step where the ground says no." "Ground and I have had disagreements for years." "Then it will win." "I have suspected as much." He looked up at the bell. "May I?" She hugged the hammer against her chest. "Why?" "Because it sounds hurt." Something in her face changed, not toward trust, but toward the painful curiosity of a child hearing an adult speak properly of a thing she loved. She stepped down from the stone with a motion that was almost a hop and almost a practiced fall, and Silas pretended not to notice how carefully she placed the braced foot after. The bell was poorly hung, not poorly made. Its hook had twisted in the flood wind, forcing the striker against one side until the rim had begun to split. It was a small thing, a warning bell for water rise or lost goats, cast from copper with a little iron, old enough that the weather had chewed it to a dull green-brown. Along the waist ran a pattern of thorn leaves and river marks. Orc work, he thought, and good work, though different from the smooth lowland bells his father had prized. This bell had been made to survive not by resisting the world, but by agreeing with it in several directions at once. "Who hung it with a square nail?" he asked before he could stop himself. The girl's scowl returned. "I did." "Ah." "Ah means what?" "Ah means I have insulted a craftswoman while standing in her river." "You have." "Then I apologize to the craftswoman and the river." She considered this. "The river does not care." "The river is wiser than most." That earned him a look so sharp it might have been the beginning of laughter if childhood had not already taught her to hide such things from strangers. She handed him the hammer, handle first, reluctantly, as if lending a tooth. Silas unbuckled his pack, set it on the driest stone he could find, and took out a narrow chisel, a coil of wire, and a small wedge of seasoned ash. He worked in the rain while the girl watched his hands with suspicious devotion. He loosened the bent hook, reset the angle, bound the split rim with wire so fine it looked like dark thread, and cushioned the striker with the ash wedge until the bell could move without wounding itself. It was not a proper repair. It would hold a week, perhaps two, if the river did not grow angrier. Sometimes that was what mending meant, not salvation, only a little more time before the next breaking. When he finished, he tapped the rim with the back of his finger. The bell rang. It was no larger than a cupped hand, no stronger than it had been when born, yet the sound opened clean in the rain, low and damp and sweet as a drop falling into a well. The girl's face went still. She did not smile. Her hand rose unconsciously to the brace on her foot, 2 fingers pressing the leather strap as if the sound had touched her there. "It knows itself again," she said. Silas felt the words enter him more deeply than they had any right to. "Yes," he said. "For now." A shadow moved behind him. He did not hear the approach. He heard only the sudden absence of the river's ease, the way the girl drew herself upright, and the soft, exact click of a spear butt settling against stone. The woman who stood beyond the altar was tall, even by orc measure, her body shaped by labor and weather rather than any wish to be admired. her shoulders broad beneath a dark oilskin cloak, her arms bare from wrist to elbow despite the cold, corded with muscle and crossed by pale scars that did not look accidental. Her skin held the green-gray tone of pine needles after frost. Her hair was black, braided close to one side and loose on the other where rain had pulled strands free against her cheek. One tusk was ringed in bronze. Around her throat hung a strip of red-dyed leather from which several small river stones had been tied, each one smoothed by years of touch. She looked first at the girl, then at the bell, then at Silas's tools, and only last at Silas. Last was worse. He lifted both hands again. His palms were black with rain and bell grease. I was asked to bring tools. No one asked you to touch clan iron. Her common was low and rough, shaped carefully, as if each word had to be taken down from a high shelf before she used it. The bell was splitting. It was ours to split. That is true. She blinked once. The spear did not lower. The girl glanced between them, unhappy now in the way children become unhappy when adults turn a simple thing into law. He made it know itself, the girl said. The woman's gaze softened by the smallest possible measure, though not at Silas. Oru, you were told not to come to the wash alone. I was not alone after he came. That is not the defense you think it is. Oru looked at the mud. Silas said nothing because the girl did not need his rescue from a scolding she had apparently earned by being exactly the sort of child who fixed bells in storms. The woman noticed his silence. Her eyes returned to him. Name? Silas Mere. That is a traveling name. It is the only one I use now. That is not what I asked. No, he said quietly. It is not. Rain gathered in the pause and fell from the alder leaves in heavy, deliberate drops. The woman studied him as if reading not whether he lied, but what kind of ruin the truth had left around him. I am Vaela Thorn of the Wash, she said at last, daughter of Haravan, blood of the cedar seat, keeper of the lower ford until someone with better judgment returns from the upper hunt. Oru made a small, offended sound. Vaela ignored it. Your bells are late, Silas Mere. So is the road. The road did not promise coin. Neither did I. The note said, take coin and leave. Then we agree on half the terms. That should have angered him, or at least warned him. Instead, it settled strangely in his chest, that blunt shape of honesty. Do you still want the bells? Vaela looked past him toward the broken bridge where the river was pulling dusk into itself by long gray ribbons. Want is a soft word. The north towers are blind. The snow line has moved twice without warning. 3 goats, 1 hunter, and a boy with more courage than sense have been lost in fog this month. Yes, we will take the bells. And me? Her hand tightened on the spear, not threatening, thinking. That depends, she said. On? Whether you can walk where Oru tells you the ground has not lied. The child brightened with importance at once, so Silas followed them away from the drowned road and into Thornwater land, placing his feet where the little girl placed hers and where Vaela, walking behind, could watch his every mistake. The black puddles breathed under the moss. The reeds leaned as if whispering about trespass. More than once, Oru stopped, pointed to a stone, and waited until he crossed to it before moving on, fierce with responsibility. Once he slipped and Vaela's hand shot out to seize the back of his coat before he could plunge knee-deep into something that smelled of old eggs and deeper trouble. She released him immediately. Thank you, he said. Do not thank me for keeping rot out of my water. Then I thank the water for being particular. Oru snorted. Vaela did not, but the rain had loosened one strand of hair against her mouth, and when she turned away he thought, absurdly, that she might have almost smiled around it. They reached the clan hold after full dark, though Silas understood only gradually that he had arrived anywhere at all. Thornwater was not a town in the human sense, not a place built to impress a road. It was a gathering of roofs and smoke and carved posts tucked into the bowl of two wooded ridges, half hidden by cedar boughs and rain screens, its halls long and low, their walls packed with river clay and timber, their entrances hung with hide curtains painted in spirals of blue and ochre. Channels carried rainwater between the houses, and little footbridges arched over them like the backs of sleeping animals. Smoke rose through stone vents and vanished into wet leaves. Somewhere something was cooking with onions, bone broth, and bitter herbs, and the smell was so warm after the road that Silas nearly had to stop walking to survive wanting it. Faces appeared from doorways. Orc faces, old and young, painted and bare, curious and closed. Children came first until called back. Dogs with heavy heads sniffed his boots and found him unconvincing. No one shouted welcome. No one raised a weapon, either, which in the north perhaps was a warmer greeting than song. Vaela led him to an outer hall where the roof sagged a little, but the hearth glowed steady. Inside were tool racks, bundles of dried reeds, stacked hides, spare axles, baskets of charcoal, and two elderly orcs playing a stone game with the vicious silence of people who had been married long enough to wage war in pebbles. They looked up at Silas, then at Vaela. "Human bellman," Vaela said. The older woman moved one stone, capturing 5. "Too wet." "That is not a clan judgment, grandmother. It is mine." The old man grunted as if the matter required no further court. Silas bowed because he knew no better gesture. Water dripped from his nose onto the floor. The old woman pointed at him. "He leaks." "I have noticed," Vaela said. "Give him the back mat before he ruins the kindling." A place was made for him near the rear of the hall, beside a stack of willow hoops and a wall that smelled strongly of cedar smoke. He was given a blanket, a bowl of stew, and a cup of something hot, sour, and smoky that made his throat reconsider the value of life before deciding in its favor. Oru sat cross-legged nearby, openly watching him eat. Vaela stood by the door speaking in Orcish with 2 hunters, rain shining along her braid. Her posture held the whole room at a distance without seeming to request it. Chieftain's blood, he thought, remembering the way she had named herself, but not the sort raised soft behind carved screens. If there were screens in Thornwater, she looked like the person sent to break them for firewood. "You chew like you are counting," Oru said. "I am trying to decide what root this is." "Moon turnip." "Is it meant to taste angry?" "Yes." "Then it is well cooked." The old woman playing stones made a sound in her throat. The old man lost 3 pebbles because he glanced at her, and his expression afterward suggested a marriage could survive many seasons without forgiveness. When the bowl was empty, Silas began to unpack the bells. He did it slowly, partly because wet fingers made clumsy servants, and partly because every person in the hall had turned to watch. One by one, he laid them on the reed mat. Fog bell, avalanche bell, fire bell, breach bell, herd bell, death bell, and the unmarked 7th, which his father had called a listening bell, and no customer had ever understood well enough to pay for. The firelight moved over them. Vaela came closer despite herself. They were not grand. No bell meant for use ever was, but they had been cast with care in a furnace tended by men now dead and polished by Silas on nights when sleep had nowhere kind to take him. Their bodies were dark bronze, their lips bright where the cloth had touched, each marked with a small notch pattern so a keeper could know by thumb what warning it carried even in blind cold. Orcs valued useful things. He saw that at once in the way the hall's suspicions shifted, not gone, but forced to make room for respect. Vaela crouched across from him, her knees cracked softly. She lifted the fog bell without asking, which ought to have troubled him, but her hands were clean and careful, and she held it not as property, but as a thing with dignity. How far? In thick weather? Half a valley if hung properly, less if the wind is against it. You make sound, obey. No, he said. I ask it where it already wants to go. Her eyes flicked to his, and the room, which had been damp and smoky and full of watchers, seemed to narrow for one fragile instant to the space between his words and her hearing of them. Then Oru leaned forward. Does one sound for snakes? Not yet. We need one. We have 4 months of snow before snakes. That is when they plan. Silas looked to Vaela. Is that true? No, but believing it keeps children from putting hands under warm rocks. A wise lie. A useful warning, Vaela corrected, and set the fog bell down. That was how the first night passed, with bells placed on a reed mat, with rain on the roof, with orcs coming in by 2s and 3s to examine human metal and pretend they were not examining the human who had brought it. Silas answered what he could. He did not ask why the clan had waited so late to send for repairs, why the old towers were failing all at once, why Vaela wore river stones at her throat with the wary tenderness of a person carrying more dead than ornaments. There would be time enough for questions. Or there would not. The road had taught him that hunger for answers could make a man rude, and grief had taught him that silence was sometimes the only door left unlocked. Near midnight, when the hall had settled and the old couple slept on opposite sides of the same snore, Oru crept to his mat and placed a small carved thing beside his pack. It was made of antler, roughly shaped like a fish, if the fish had been described by someone who admired stones. For the bell, she whispered. What bell? The one by the wash. It was my mother's. She said when it broke I could fix it, but I was too small then. Now I am less small. Silas touched the carved fish with one finger. Less small is important. Oru nodded solemnly. Vaela says if I go alone again, she will tie my good foot to her belt. Would that stop you? No. Then she knows you well. The child grinned and lost it quickly, as if a smile were a coin she could not afford to spend in front of a stranger. She returned to her sleeping place near the hearth, curling beneath a patched blue blanket. Vaela stood in the doorway, half hidden by the rain curtain. Silas could not tell how much she had heard. Her face revealed nothing, but her hand had risen to the stones at her throat. In the morning, Thornwater began before dawn. It began with a horn made from something larger than seemed necessary, with dogs shaking themselves beside sleeping platforms, with women lifting cauldrons onto hooks, with men carrying split logs under both arms, with children sent outside to wash their faces in rain barrels and returning insulted by cold. It began with no one explaining anything to Silas, and everyone expecting him to notice enough to become less burdensome by breakfast. He tried. He stood too close to the hearth and was moved away by a grandmother's elbow. He offered to carry a water yoke and was handed the lighter side by a boy half his height, which felt like judgment and kindness in equal measure. He nearly stepped over a threshold cord marked with blue beads until Oru hissed and pointed at his own eyes with 2 fingers, the universal language of "don't be stupid where gods can see." He accepted a bowl with his right hand and heard 3 people inhale. He shifted to his left without comment. The room exhaled. No one praised him. He preferred it. By mid-morning, Vaela took him to the first tower. It rose at the northern edge of the hold, built not of stone but of whole cedar trunks bound together with bands of dark iron, its ladder slick with rain, its platform hung with tattered wind flags and 3 dead bells. The old warning line had once passed from ridge to ridge, sound answering sound across the valleys whenever fog closed, snow slipped, or human riders came north with banners stiff from cold. Now 2 bells were cracked, and one had no tongue. A flock of blackbirds nested in the roof beams, discussing him with dislike. Vaela climbed first, and Silas followed with a bag of tools banging against his hip, and the uncomfortable knowledge that he was being watched from below by several people who had discovered a free entertainment. At the top, wind struck him clean in the face. The whole clanhold spread below. Rain-dark roofs, smoking vents, narrow paths, the braided water channels flashing silver. The main hall crouched against the hillside beneath an ancient cedar whose trunk was wide enough to have hosted history without asking permission. Beyond the roofs, the thornwash curved through reeds and alder, and beyond that, the drowned road lay hidden under mist. Vaela was already examining the frame. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes." "Today?" "Some of it." "All of it by snow?" "If snow waits politely." "Snow is a rude guest." "I have met its cousins." She gave him a sidelong look. "Then work." So he worked. The hours narrowed to hands, metal, rain, rope, and breath. He removed the cracked bells, hung the fog bell in their place, filed the burr from an iron bracket, and showed Vaela how the notch patterns could be read in the dark. She learned quickly, her fingers more precise than his because she watched a thing once and distrusted the need to watch it twice. When the wind grew too sharp, she did not complain. When blood welled from a splinter at her thumb, she put the thumb in her mouth, looked at him as if daring concern, and continued binding the rope. He did not offer a cloth. After a while, he placed one beside the bracket where her hand would find it without anyone admitting mercy had walked between them. She used it. Late in the afternoon, he lifted the fog bell into place. It was heavier than it looked, and the tower swayed beneath them. Vaela braced the rope over her shoulder, rain shining on her forearms, and for a moment her strength was not a thing to be admired from a distance, but a living pressure in the shared work, the rope taut between her body and his hands, their breaths falling into the same harsh rhythm. When the bell settled, he drove the pin home. The sound of the hammer stroke rang up his arm and into his teeth. "Now," he said. Vaela took the striker cord. Below, Oru stood with 3 children, all pretending they had not been waiting for this exact moment since breakfast. Vaela pulled. The bell answered. Its voice rolled into the valley, low and round, dark with bronze and weather, a sound made for fog and distance. Birds burst from the tower roof in offended black handfuls. Dogs barked. Somewhere below, an old man laughed once and stopped as if not wishing to set a precedent. The bell's note traveled along the ridge and returned altered by rain, almost like another bell far off had heard and was thinking whether to reply. Silas closed his eyes before he could stop himself. His father had always closed his eyes after a first true ringing. "Listen," he would say, "not to the sound, but to what it leaves behind. A good bell leaves room. A bad bell leaves noise." This bell left room. When he opened his eyes, Vaela was watching him, not with suspicion now, but with something quieter and more difficult. "You miss someone," she said. "Several." "That is a heavy number." "It keeps changing size." Her gaze moved toward the valley where the last note was fading into rain. "Sound carries the gone ones poorly." "Sometimes it carries them too well." They stood in the tower with the weather moving around them, both looking outward because looking at each other would have required deciding what had just been spoken. After a while, Vaela descended first. Silas followed, and the latter seemed less hostile than it had in the morning. Days in Thornwater gathered like wool on a spindle. Not quickly, not smoothly, but strand by strand, with work twisting them into something that could hold weight if handled with care. Silas rose before the horn because sleep came lightly in a place that was not his. He learned to bank a hearth without smothering it, to scrape mud from boots before entering a hall, to keep the left hand for offerings and the right for tools, to never praise a child's courage when patience would be more useful, to eat fermented river greens with the face of a man who had accepted that not every battle deserved witnesses. He learned that orc laughter often began in the chest and arrived late at the mouth. He learned that grief was not hidden in Thornwater exactly, but stored in visible places. A blade hung above a doorway, a child's blanket kept folded on an empty shelf, a river stone tied to a throat. The stones Vaela wore were not decoration. Oru told him while sitting on a stool beside his workbench, swinging her braced foot and pretending not to stare at the tiny whistle he was carving from elderwood. "That one is Sava," she said, pointing at the largest gray stone against Vaela's collarbone while Vaela stood outside speaking to a hunter. "My mother. She threw knives better than everyone and made bad soup. That brown one is Rook, who went under ice because he would not listen. That small black one is baby Tarn, who did not grow teeth." Silas's knife slowed. "And the red one?" Oru's face folded inward, not in grief alone, but in confusion older than she was. "Vaela's brother. He was meant to sit cedar after Haravan. The river took him in spring flood. Vaela went in after. She came out. He did not." Outside, Vaela glanced toward them as if she had felt her own name touched. Silas looked down at the whistle. "Does she know you tell strangers, clan dead? You are not a stranger. Strangers do not fix door latches badly for 3 days. I fixed it badly once." 3 days, Oru repeated with clan authority. He gave her the whistle. It produced, when blown, the sound of a startled duck losing an argument. Oru's delight was so fierce and private that she ran outside with it before anyone could see too much of her face. Vaela came in a moment later. "She talks when she trusts too quickly," she said. "Children talk when adults keep too much in locked rooms." "Is that human wisdom?" "No, I made it up to defend myself." Vaela took the broken latch from the bench and examined his repair. "This will hold. Only 1 day? 2, if the door is not insulted. I will speak kindly to it. You speak to objects often. They listen better than people. Objects do not forgive either." He looked at her then. She had said it without decoration, but the words had a bruise inside them. "No," he said. "They don't. They only keep the shape we leave in them." Vaela's fingers rested on the latch, thumb against the new pin. Rain had stopped for once, and the hall was full of thin gray light. She seemed tired in it, not weak, never that, but worn at some inward edge. He had seen her command hunters, lift beams, silence disputes with a look, kneel in mud to adjust Oru's brace with hands made gentle by practice. He had not yet seen anyone ask whether she slept. "You carry too many stones," he said before caution could intervene. Her gaze sharpened. "I mean the ones no leather holds. You count what is not yours." "Yes." "Why?" Because he knew the posture of a person standing between the living and the dead with both arms out, foolishly trying to keep either side from touching. Because some mornings he still woke reaching for the sound of his brother dropping firewood beside the furnace. Because Vaela moved through Thornwater as if belonging had become another duty, and she would perform it until the muscles failed. Instead, he said, "Habit. Break it. I have been told I am slow." "Then begin sooner." She set the latch down and left. It was not anger, exactly. It was retreat with weapons still held. Silas let her go, and that was the first mercy he gave her knowingly. The trouble beneath Thornwater announced itself by smell. Not rot, though Silas first thought of rot when he woke one night to a bitter smoke at the back of his throat. Not fire, either, though several children began coughing in their sleep and dogs whined under the tables. It was metal, heated too long, rain on old ashes, sour stone. The hearth in the outer hall still burned, but its flames had turned low and blue, bending sideways, though the shutters were sealed. The old woman from the first night sat up at once. Her eyes were no longer sleepy. "Rootfire," she said. Then the horn sounded, not from the tower, but from beneath the main hall. Thornwater woke into motion without noise. That was what frightened Silas most. No panic, no shouted confusion, only bodies rising from blankets, hands finding cloaks and knives, children gathered, elders lifted, water carried, but not thrown. Vaela appeared in the doorway with her hair unbraided, a spear in one hand and Oru's blanket in the other. "Oru," she said. "Here." The child was already pulling on her brace with shaking fingers. Vaela crossed the room, knelt, and fastened the strap herself. Her face was calm in the way a sealed pot was calm before steam found the crack. Silas reached for his boots. "What is rootfire?" Vaela did not look up. "The first hearth, under Cedar Hall. It does not go blue." "And if it does?" "Then old promises are being eaten." No one explained further. They took him because he was a bell-maker and therefore knew something of metal, or because Oru seized his sleeve and refused to release it, or because fear makes room for use where trust has not yet finished building. The main hall had been cleared by the time they entered. Hiravan, chieftain of Thornwater, stood at the central posts with 2 elders and a woman whose arms were painted in spirals of ash. He was not as large as Silas had imagined a chieftain would be, but age sat on him like armor. His hair was white, his tusks capped in dull silver, and his left eye clouded pale from an old wound. The room smelled of cedar smoke, damp wool, and the wrong metal. Beneath the central hearth, stone slabs had been lifted to reveal stairs descending into the hill. Not a cave, Silas told some absurd part of himself that disliked the dark with childish stubbornness. A chamber, a made place, a throat of the house. Words mattered, even when fear did not respect them. Vaela glanced at him, reading something anyway. "Stay if you need." "I can descend." That was not pride bait. "I know." "Do you?" "No," he admitted, and followed her down. The rootfire chamber was low, round, and older than the hall above it. Its walls were packed clay hardened by generations of heat. Cedar roots descended through the ceiling in thick, twisting cords, some alive and pale beneath shaved bark, some blackened and polished by smoke until they looked like carved horn. In the center burned a fire with no visible fuel, a bed of red coals sunk into stone, its flames, normally, Silas guessed, the color of ordinary warmth. Now, blue light crawled across them, thin as oil. Around the fire stood hammered copper plates, each inscribed with names in orcish marks, thousands of them, some old enough that the strokes had softened under touch. The rootfire made no sound. That was wrong before anyone said so. All fires spoke. They cracked, sighed, licked, consumed. This fire lay silent as a held breath. The ash-painted woman crouched and held her palm over the flames. Her face tightened. "Something drinks below," she said in common for Silas's sake, though perhaps not for kindness. "Not water, not spirit. Human iron." Every eye turned to him. Silas felt the air become small. "I did not put it there." "No," Hiravan said. His voice was low, scraped by age and command. "But your dead may have." Vaela's hand shifted, not toward her spear but toward Oru, who stood just behind her with both fists in her cloak. That movement steadied Silas in a way he did not understand until later. She had not defended him. She had defended the child from the room's anger. It was enough. He knelt near the copper plates. The heat was strangely weak. He smelled again that bitter, heated metal, and beneath it a scent he knew so suddenly that his stomach hollowed. Forge scale oil. The kind his father had mixed with vinegar and tallow to temper boundary spikes for human surveyors after the border treaty, years before Silas was old enough to understand that a treaty could mean peace to one people and a new nail in the foot to another. He reached into his tool roll and took out the listening bell. Vaela watched. "You brought one with no mark." "It listens for metal under stone." "Why would a bell do that?" "Because my father disliked digging in the wrong place." "Useful dislike?" "Sometimes." He set the little bell on the floor. It had no tongue. Its body was plain, darker than the others, cast from bronze mixed with a thread of river iron. Silas placed one hand against the chamber floor, closed his eyes, and tapped the bell's rim with a bone pick. The sound was too soft for ordinary hearing. He felt it instead, a shiver in his wrist, a thin note traveling through packed clay, stone, root, and old heat. It went down, touched something, and came back bent. There. Silas opened his eyes. Something long and square, iron core, bronze head, under that wall. The ash-painted woman said a word in Orcish that made two elders spit into the fire. "Treaty tooth," Haravan said. Silas looked at him. After the Red Flood Wars, humans came with papers and measuring chains. They drove teeth into hills to mark where law would sit. We pulled up those we found. One remained. "And now it has woken?" "Old iron does not wake," said the ash woman. "It remembers being told to bite." The root fire guttered. Oru made a small sound, despite herself. Vaela's jaw tightened. The blue flame climbed one of the copper nameplates and licked without heat at the marks. Silas reached toward it, then stopped before his hand crossed a boundary he did not know. "Can it be removed?" "Not by digging," Haravan said. "The cedar root grew around it. Cut wrong and the hull sickens, pull wrong and the root fire goes dark." "What can I do?" The chieftain looked at him with the full weight of a people who had not invited him into their wounded places and now found his hands inside the wound anyway. "Listen," Haravan said, "if you can bear what answers." From that night onward, Silas belonged to the root fire chamber as much as to any mat or meal. No one said this. It happened by the simple fact that he kept descending, morning and evening, with tools, wax tablets, chalk, wire, and the listening bell. Vaela went with him because the chamber was clan heart and because suspicion still had a legitimate chair at the table. Oru went when allowed because she had decided the fire liked her better than most adults and because no one could fully forbid a child who knew all the floorboards that complained before they betrayed her. The work was not repair in the way Silas understood repair. He could not open the earth and draw the treaty tooth out like a rotten nail. He could not pour water, solder a seam, replace a cracked tongue. He had to learn the chamber's sound, then the roots, then the tooths, then the ugly conversation among them. The human spike had been made to declare measurement. It still did. It told the hill, endlessly and without malice, that this line ended here, that this side belonged to one law and that side to another, that a thing could be made true by being hammered deep enough. The root fire, fed for generations by names spoken over birth, death, welcome, apology, oath, and return, answered in an older language. Here is who we are. Here is who came before. Here is the warmth we keep so children do not freeze in the dark. Neither could hear the other, so they hurt. Silas began making a bridge for sound. He hammered thin strips of bronze until they trembled at 3 notes at once. He braided wire through cedar root without piercing living wood. He asked the ash woman, whose name was Gear, to read old marks he could not touch. He asked Haravan where the treaty men had stood. He asked Vaela what the river sounded like in spring flood, what the cedar sounded like under hard frost, what word the clan used when a person came home changed and was not asked to be unchanged before being fed. "Thren," she said. They were alone in the chamber. Oru had been sent above to practice numbers, which she considered punishment disguised as survival. Blue flame whispered along the coals, less silent now, but still wrong. "Thren," Silas repeated, shaping the consonant badly. Vaela grimaced. "You said mushroom." "Home changed mushroom. Do not say that upstairs." "I had not planned to." "Plans fail near children." He smiled down at the wire in his hands. "Then I will fail privately." For a long moment, only the fire moved. Vaela sat across from him, her spear laid within reach, her forearms resting on her knees. In the chamber's low light, the river stones at her throat looked black. He had become used to her presence in the way one becomes used to a steady pain or a steady warmth, not forgetting it, but allowing the body to shape itself around the fact. When she was absent, the work felt louder. "Thren is not forgiveness," she said. "No?" "No. Forgiveness is between the wound and the hand that made it. Thren is when the house says, 'You are changed. Your bowl is still here.'" Silas's fingers stilled on the wire. The chamber seemed to tilt, though nothing moved. He thought of Vale End, of the shop door with its notice, of the key he had kept until the metal wore a smooth place in his palm, of all the roads he had taken, because no house had said anything at all when he left. "That is a generous word," he said. "It is a necessary one." "Those are often the same." "No," Vaela said, but without heat. "Generosity can tire. Necessity rises anyway." He looked at her then and found her already looking at him. The blue fire laid strange light along her cheekbones and caught in the bronze ring around her tusk. She was not soft. He did not want her softened. He wanted, with a suddenness that frightened him, to sit in some future room where she felt no need to hold every beam on her shoulders merely because her brother had drowned before he could inherit the cedar seat. He wanted to hear her laugh fully, not as a thing bitten in half. He wanted to be trusted with the ugliness of her bad days and the quiet tasks of her good ones. The wanting was so plain that it seemed to have been waiting in him, patient as a seed under snow. He looked away first. Vaela did not spare him by pretending not to notice. She simply let the silence keep both their names. The bond came by accident, which was to say it came, as most old powers do, through a door no one living remembered to fear. On the 15th night after the rootfire blewed, the first snow fell. It arrived softly, almost apologetic after all the rain, covering the roofs, the cedar boughs, the mud paths, the broken places in the road, Oru's footprints, Silas's discarded wire ends, and the stone steps to the chamber with one equal hand. The clan gathered in the main hall because first snow belonged to the dead as much as to children. Bowls were filled, names were spoken, not loudly. No one performed grief for the room. Each name was fed to the hearth with a pinch of salt, a breath, or a drop of fermented milk touched to the fingers. Silas stood near the rear, intending to witness and no more. Oru had other intentions. She came to him with a pinch of salt in her palm, her face too solemn for mischief and too determined for obedience. "You have dead?" "Yes." "They will be hungry at first snow." He had been careful all evening, careful not to take place, careful not to let longing turn him rude, careful not to imagine his father, who had never seen Thornwater, standing among orc dead and complaining that the fire smoked too low. "Oru," Vaela said from the side, warning beneath the name. The child lifted her chin. "Hunger does not care if someone is human." The hall changed around that sentence. Not much. Enough. Haravan watched from the cedar seat, his clouded eye pale as bone. Gare, the ash woman, tilted her head. Vaela's mouth tightened, but grief and pride moved across her face so quickly that Silas might have missed either if he had not been learning her weather. He should have refused. Instead, he accepted the salt. The grains lay cold in his palm. He stepped toward the hearth. Every person in Thornwater seemed to become both distant and near, as if he had entered water and sound had changed. He thought he would speak his father's name first, or his brother's, or Mara, who had promised spring. But the name that rose was the one his mother had whispered when he was a child fevered under quilts, the name no customer knew, no creditor had written, no road had worn smooth. "Silas of the small rain," he said in the old dialect of his valley, and did not know why he had given himself with the dead instead of offering them. The hearth answered, not with flame, with sound. The listening bell hanging in his work pouch across the room rang once. Everyone heard it. The note went down through the hall boards, into the root chamber, into the cedar, into the treaty tooth, into every copper nameplate under the house. The central hearth flared, not blue but white, and the fire below roared up through it with a voice like winter breaking in a river. Silas felt the sound enter his ribs and open there. Across the room, Vaela gasped and seized the stones at her throat. Oru dropped the rest of the salt. Then he knew Vaela's name. Not as a word, he already knew that. He knew it as warmth behind his breastbone, as rain on cedar bark, as the weight of river stones against skin, as the ache in a shoulder that had pulled someone from floodwater and failed to pull another, as the shape of a laugh held back for so many years it had become part of her discipline. He knew her standing 20 paces away as if the space between them had grown a thread, not tight, not pulling, but unmistakably alive. Vaela stared at him. The hall had gone utterly still. Gera reached the hearth first. She threw ash into the flames and spoke 3 sharp words. Haravan rose. The children were taken back. Oru began to cry without sound, furious at herself for doing it. Silas could not move. He could feel Vaela breathing, not hear, feel. Each breath against his own, not inside him exactly, but near enough to shame intimacy. Vaela crossed the hall in 4 strides, took his wrist, and pulled him out into the snow. No one stopped her. Cold struck his face. The door hide fell behind them, muffling the sudden rise of voices within. Snow came down in thick, slow flakes, gathering in Vaela's loose hair, on the shoulders of her dark tunic, on his sleeves. She did not release his wrist until they reached the shadow of the great cedar. Then she turned on him. "What did you do?" "I don't know." "Do not give me a small answer." "I gave the name no one uses," he said, and heard the tremor in it. "The hearth answered. That is all I know." "That is not all." "No." He could still feel her there, a second weather under his skin. Anger, fear, old grief disturbed from its careful arrangement. Beneath it, something else, not softer, not kinder, but vulnerable in a way neither of them had permitted. Recognition without permission. Vaela stepped back as if distance might thin it. It did not. Her eyes widened slightly. Silas looked down at his own hands. Can it be cut? She laughed once, and the sound had no humor. You ask quickly. I ask because you did not choose it. Her face shifted. The anger did not leave. It found another shape. Inside the hall, Gera's voice rose, chanting now, and the root fire under the floor answered with a low hum. The listening bell rang again, very faintly. Vaela flinched. The hearth names what has already crossed its roots, she said. Sometimes between a child and the elder who takes them in. Sometimes between sworn shieldmates. Once, in my grandmother's story, between a widow and the wolf that slept outside her door all winter. It is not marriage. It is not ownership. It is not gentle. What is it? A knowing. Snow gathered on her lashes and did not melt at once. She seemed almost frightened by her own explanation, and that frightened him more than the magic. And why us? Because you fed it a true name while holding the treaty tooth's sound in your hands. Because I have sat with you under the root for 15 days and answered questions no outsider should have known to ask. Because Oru put salt in your palm, and the dead are meddlers. Choose any reason. Old powers are greedy. They take all. Silas swallowed. Tell me what to do. No. Vaela, no! The word was sharper now. I will not become another road you ask to read for safe steps. He took that because it was deserved. The thread between them trembled with her anger and, worse, with the hurt beneath it. He wanted to soothe it. He knew that wanting was dangerous. Then I will stand here, he said, and not run until you tell me whether my leaving would help. She looked at him for a long time. The snow thickened, softening the roofs, the carved posts, the dark channels of water. Somewhere nearby, Oru was calling his name and being held back by an adult with better sense. Vaela's breathing slowed. The thread between them did not. At last, she stepped closer. Not gently, not unkindly. Just close enough that he could see the small scar at the corner of her mouth, the place where one river stone had rubbed a dark crescent into her skin. Run if you want, she whispered, but the bond already knows your name. The words should have sounded like warning. They did. They also sounded like grief. I don't want to run, he said. Want is not one thing. No. What else? He thought he should answer carefully, but the bond made carefulness feel like hiding a knife under a tablecloth. It did not read his thoughts. Thank every power. But it held the shape of his feeling near enough that deceit would have been an insult. I want not to have taken something from you. Her eyes searched his. That cannot be your only want. No, he said, and the snow fell between them like innumerable small silences. It is the one I trust most tonight. Vaela closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her anger had not gone, but it had stopped looking for a place to strike. Good, she said. Begin there. The beginning proved to be less a moment than a winter. There was no ceremony the next morning, no clasping of hands before the hearth, no elder naming what neither of them trusted enough to feed. There was only work, which was kinder because it asked for the body first and the heart later. Silas moved his mat to the far wall of the outer hall. They descended each day to the root fire chamber with Gere's ash marks on their wrists. Silas listened for the treaty tooth. Vaela answered questions about water paths, cedar roots, and the names on copper plates softened by generations of fingers. Sometimes the bond warmed when their hands reached for the same tool. Sometimes it tightened when grief rose in one and the other felt the edge of it. Each time they paused. Each time, one asked with eyes or breath or rough words whether to come closer or step away. When the new moon came, he found the answer in Oru's broken wash bell, not in forcing the crack shut, but in giving sound another path. He shaped 7 bronze threads, thin as reeds and stamped with no border mark, and Vaela guided them around cedar, copper nameplate, and buried iron. Hravan spoke the names of those who had kept the first hearth. Gera spoke the names of those who had died away from it and still been welcomed by smoke. Oru spoke her mother's name with her hand in Vaela's cloak. Silas spoke his dead last. The rootfire listened. The treaty tooth shuddered under the hill, not defeated or forgiven, but no longer allowed to tell the whole earth what shape it must hold. The blue left the flames. Red returned slowly, coal by coal, until the chamber breathed heat again and the copper plates began to hum beneath the names. Afterward, no one cheered. Thornwater was not wasteful with relief. Bowls were filled, shoulders were touched, children were sent to bed and did not go. Hravan gave Silas the promised coin and, after a pause, a place on the spring road party if he wished to carry letters south. Vaela stood beside the hearth and said nothing, but the bond between them held its breath. That night she found him by the little wash bell. Snow had crusted over the alder roots. The river beneath the ice spoke in muffled, stubborn syllables. "You can leave when the east melt opens," Vaela said. "Yes. Do not make staying into a chain because the hearth gave us a thread." He turned. Moonlight silvered the scar at her mouth, the bronze around her tusk, the river stones at her throat. "I want the road," he said. "And I want the roof that leaks in the outer hall. I want to teach Oru why a bell rings truer when it is not bullied into shape. I want to see whether you laugh differently in spring. I want to go south carrying your father's letters and come back before the berries darken, if roads permit. I want a life that moves and returns." Vaela was quiet a long while. "That is not a small want." "No." "Good. Small wants frighten easily." She held out her hand. This time he did not wait for accident. "May I?" "Yes." He took her fingers. The bond did not flare. It settled, red and deep as the root fire, as if it had only been waiting for choice to catch up with knowing. Vaela's thumb moved once across his knuckle, a small, astonishing mercy. "I love you," he said, because the words had become less dangerous than silence. Her mouth softened, not into surrender, into room. "I know," she said. Then, seeing his expression, she made the low sound that was almost laughter and more. "I love you also, Silas of the small rain. It irritates me." He laughed then, helpless and quiet. Oru's whistle answered from somewhere behind the alder, where the child was badly pretending not to spy. Vaela closed her eyes. "She knows. She always does." The wash bell stirred in the wind and rang once, patched and clear. Vaela leaned her forehead against his. Not a kiss yet, not less than one. The space between them warm with cedar smoke, cold river, and all the unnamed work ahead. Above the valley, the towers kept their watch. Below it, the root fire burned, and in the place where Silas had once carried only roads, a name had made a home and was waiting to be lived in.